Welcome back. We continue with our conversation in regards to the interesting narrative. And we are now going to turn to the question that many of us, as we read this title, have to engage. And it is simply the question of, for lack of a better phrase, the origin of racism. The origin of racism. How can you explain the fact that white people in our title, in our text, slave traders, felt that they could do what they did to Africans? Rounding them up, putting them on ships, bringing them to a foreign country, selling them against their will, treating them then as slaves, and many of them died as slaves. What gives them the right? Let's work with some simpleton answers that are probably partially, if not fully, wrong. Answer number one: all the white people were bad people. Okay? All the white people were bad people. This is often an answer that's given. White people are evil. All you got to do is look at the history of the world. Look at the ways they've treated non-white people. White people are bad because they are evil, and that explains racism. But the problem with this is that even in our own narrative text, and in lots of other texts, many African slaves will record stories of how white people were in fact very helpful and beneficial to non-white people. In other words, the easy comment is, not all white people were racists. Not all white people supported slavery. And in fact, the American Civil War itself is fought by predominantly, of course, white people to work to emancipate slaves. So the argument that it's just bad people doesn't seem to work very well at all. Okay? Answer number two. That seems a bit too simplified. It's just the way they were raised. Let's go ahead and write this one down as an answer that's often given for racism. How do you explain racism? Just the way they were raised. But again, we have problems with this answer. There are lots of people who are raised around racist environments who themselves are not racist. Okay? Happens all the time. How do you explain this fact? Yes, the way we are raised has a lot to do with the way we think, but it doesn't have everything to do with the way we think. Would you agree? You can change the way you think, the way you've been raised. Just because you're raised by somebody who's racist does not mean that you will be racist. And of course, conversely, sometimes people end up racist who are not themselves racist at all. Well then, can you answer the question for me, Mr. McGee? Why is it that slave owners honestly believed they were better than black Africans? How do you explain that fact? The place that we have to go, and I'll be working now on my whiteboard, the place that we have to go, and this is not the only answer, but it certainly is one answer. And it's going to be an academic answer for us, and so we're going to put it in our notes this way. We've got to go back in time to a very influential philosopher, thinker, whose name is Aristotle. Aristotele. Aristotle. Now, Aristotle is a very famous Greek thinker. From 300 years before the birth of Christ. Okay? Aristotle will be the first important, write it down, scientist. Scientist. He's what we will call a naturalist. He studies the world of nature. In other words, he looks at that tree outside that window that Ruthie planted out there for me that we call Ruthie's tree. And imagine for a moment if I were all of a sudden to say, you know what? I need that tree to be a Christmas tree. I don't want it to look the way it looks right now. I'm going to go tell it to change and be a Christmas tree. So out I go into the courtyard, and I start screaming at that tree. I need you to change and look like an evergreen tree, a Christmas tree. I don't want you to look this way anymore. You'd come up to me and you'd tap me on the shoulder and say, hey, lunatic, you need to understand something about trees. It's just the way they are. You can scream all you want to at that tree, but it's just the way it is. Are you ready for this? It is its nature to be that kind of tree and not a Christmas tree. Yeah, but I don't want it to look like, I want it. No. You don't understand. Just the way it is. Now, for Aristotle and the Greeks, they explained the world in a pyramid that you will want to write in your notes. That put at the top of the pyramid the gods. Now remember, the Greeks are polytheistic. They believe in more than one deity. Yes? Okay? The gods. What makes the gods so significant? Two things. They never die, and they're all-knowing. They know everything. Okay? Beneath the gods will sit men. Beneath men will sit women, for Aristotle and the Greeks. And beneath women will sit slaves. Now we're going to get to this discussion about the origin of racism in many ways. And quite frankly, the origin of gender bias as well. Simple question. Whoa. Why is it for Aristotle and the Greeks that the gods are at the top of this pyramid and slaves and women are at the bottom of the pyramid? Okay? That's going to be an important question. By the way, you might put off to the side the word value. That is to say importance. Right? Importance. And Aristotle will say it this way. Watch my whiteboard and this will make sense. As you go up the pyramid, greater value. As you go down the pyramid, lesser value. Got me? Even though, watch my whiteboard, there's way more. See how the pyramid's built? There's way more at the bottom of the pyramid. Doesn't matter. Greater value at the top of the pyramid, lesser value at the bottom of the pyramid. Okay? Now, how can you explain a project like this? Write it down. The word is organic. This is an organic or a naturalistic view of the world. That is to say, it's the way it's supposed to be. Okay? Now, how does this model work? Well, watch this and watch my whiteboard for a second. Let's imagine for a moment that a woman were to say to a man, watch my whiteboard, I want to be equal with you. Men can argue very simply, that's as insane as you telling that tree out there to change into a Christmas tree. Well, why is it that that tree is the way it is? Blame it on the gods. That's an interesting mantra. Blame it on the gods. That's the way the gods made it. Don't mess with it. This Aristotelian view is a very conservative view in this regards. It is a view which builds towards stasis. We don't like change. No change. It is the way that it is. Right? Okay? Now, think about this for a moment. You would call Mr. McGee an insane person if I stood out in that courtyard and screamed at that tree to tell it to become a Christmas tree. You would say, dude, you clearly don't understand nature if you're standing out there screaming at that tree because you want it to change. It'd be like screaming at the sun not to come up in the morning. It is an organic or a naturalistic view. It's the way that it is. Okay? The same argument will be given in regards to trying to change the status of women to be equal with men. It's just the way it is because that's what the gods wanted. In other words, watch my whiteboard for a second. If you challenge the status of this, let's imagine, for example, slaves say, we want to be equal with all men. Proponents of this view, including Aristotle, would say, you are challenging the will of the gods. That makes you dangerous, not just insane. To ask that tree to change to a Christmas tree just makes you insane, not dangerous. But to ask slaves to be considered equal with men calls into question your belief in the gods. Early on, are you ready for this? Early on, one of the biggest arguments against equality in this pyramid was atheism. I'll say it again so you write it down. Early on, one of the biggest arguments against equality was atheism. Atheism means you don't believe in a God. In other words, if you believe in the gods, then you believe the world has an order and that's the way it's supposed to be. That's why Ruthie's tree looks that way and not like a Christmas tree. If you try and change this order where men run the world, by the way, this is often referred to as a patriarchy because the word for men is, father is patra familias. So the patriarchy is a worldview that says men have power and run the world. Okay? So it is not easy or not difficult to see that one step beyond this is for white men to begin to say that they are superior to black men. It's the way the gods willed it. Are you ready for this? In the time of Aristotle, they had slaves. Slavery out of Africa was not a new institution. It had been going on for a long time. Watch my whiteboard. What was the number one reason almost always that slave merchants happened in the first place? This right here. It was for economic purposes. You make money. Okay? And that money led to, of course, lots of power, didn't it? Now, if you'll think about it, this power is related to this notion of value. Would you agree with me? In other words, higher up we go, not only have you a greater value or importance, but you also got what? More power. Right? One of the challenges, then, of talking about racism is to have a historical perspective. I'll say that again so you can write it down. One of the most important things when we talk about racism and trying to understand the reasons why people believe the way they believe has everything to do with a historical understanding. Aristotle, for a long time, is going to be the standard answer to the question, why is it men are superior to women? Why is it white men are superior to black slaves? Okay? In 1776, boy oh boy, I hope you're writing this down. In 1776, an American named Tom Jefferson writes a famous essay called The Declaration of Independence, where, we'll study this together, he says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, everybody knows it, that all men are created equal. Whoa, what an amazing line. All men are created equal. That's what he wrote. But Tom Jefferson owned slaves when he wrote that line. What? Tom Jefferson, the guy that said all men are created equal, owned slaves? Yes. How you explain that? Tom Jefferson believed it was in the natural order of the world that a black man was born to be a slave as opposed to a white man who was born to be a slave owner. Now, Jefferson's views on this began to change through his lifetime. And he began to challenge the ideas of Aristotelian notions. And in fact, his slaves were emancipated upon his death. But it would take America a long time and a very nasty, nasty war before we would finally begin to really grapple with the fundamental issues of racism. In large measure, it was changing the way people thought about the fundamental understandings of what it means to be a human being. What makes us human? What makes us human? Now, one of the answers that's often given to this notion of racism and why racism is just simply the word fear. So let's go ahead and write that one in our notes as well. You will notice that in the reading of the interesting narrative, that once they get to Barbados, there is tremendous fear. They are afraid what? They will be what? What are they afraid of? Oh no, they brought us all the way over here, right, to eat us, right? That was the fear. They're going to eat us. Oh no, tremendous fear. Answer, no. You don't have to worry about that. And they go, no. You're not going to get eaten. You're over here to work. Oh. Fear, of course, cuts both ways. Why did the white slave owners have to put the slaves in chains? Because they're afraid of them. Afraid of what? Right? On any plantation, often there are going to be a whole lot more slaves than there are going to be slave owners. Would you agree with me? Right? So this notion of fear is often rooted at the very basis of racism. A fear of what? Well, injury, fear of survival, fear of economic crises. There's any number of answers. But very regularly when people respond to you from a racist perspective, you have to understand it's rooted in a certain kind of fear and, let's get to the next one, ignorance. Ignorance. One of the most important things about this interesting narrative is that it helped people become more knowledgeable about something they didn't know. Very regularly people will say, I once thought I was better than somebody else until I got to know him or her. And then I went, oh, well, you guys kind of live very similar to us. Right. Ignorance. Okay. To overcome ignorance, though, takes a lot of time. And it takes patience. Would you agree with me? Patience. It's not always so easy to see the world through another's eyes. We know what we know. Okay? So one of the important things about learning to read and think, for example, the interesting narrative is a classic example, is once you can read a text, you can begin to think about that text, and once you become educated, you have a larger view of the situation. Make sense? Finally, let's talk about different understandings of moral development. Moral development, what is right and what is wrong. We're aware that there's at least 3 different developmental stages, we might call it, that people go through as they mature. Watch this. I hope you're taking notes right now. It's 3 stages of moral development. What is right and what is wrong. The first stage is what we will simply call egocentric. Ego meaning all about me. If you've ever spent any time around a 3-year-old, you know all about egocentrism. The 3-year-old, the 5-year-old, the 6-year-old will say, the world is all about me. Me, me, me. I'm the most important person in the whole wide world. Nobody else matters. A very egocentric view of morals. What's right and wrong is what I want it to be. It's all about me. So, for example, what I like, that's morally good. What I don't like, that's morally bad. It's all about me. But somewhere in a child's development, an adult comes along and goes, yeah, no. It isn't all just about you at all. There are things called rules that other people make, and you have to conform to those rules. This is our second development of moral stage, and it's an important one. This we call ethnocentric. If egocentric is, it's all about me, ethnocentric ethnocentric is it's about a group, a family, a tribe, a city, a nation, however you want to think about that group. It can be a small group or it can be a large group, right? Ethnocentric moral development then takes all different kinds of forms. If you're a high school student, you know all about it. There's different kinds of moral understandings depending upon what group you're a part of, right? And so notice the movement from an individual perspective, egocentric, to an ethnocentric, a group perspective. Many people stay at the ethnocentric developmental stage. Racism is almost always rooted in the ethnocentric view. Our tribe, our family, our group says those people are lesser than us. Ethnocentric. Okay? There is a third developmental stage of moral development, and it is the one that many of our writers are challenging us to think about, and this one is what we will call a world-centric view. Sometimes referred to as an integral view, a world-centric view. If we move from an egocentric view to an ethnocentric view, it can't just be all about you, right? We can move from an ethnocentric view that says, the best is what my family believes. The best is what my religion believes. The best is what my country believes, however you think of it. Okay. To a world-centric view that says the following: all humans have rights, regardless of their color, regardless of their race, regardless of their gender orientation. Everybody has rights because they are human. And so we have the term then, human rights. The 20th century, the century that we left a while ago now, the 20th century is an important century because it was the century where the question of human rights